In this video, we're covering a whole bunch of information of how to take your comic book collecting to the next level. And the main topic is when to decide to crack press and resubmit a comic. But there's a whole bunch of helpful information all along the way about grading comics, the grading process, whether you're brand new to comics or you've been doing this for a lifetime. There's helpful information in here that will be beneficial to everyone, because the crack press and resubmit process can be a very lucrative way to have this hobby fund itself. I have friends who fund the entire hobby by using this process, that they've absolutely mastered it, and they put no new money into comic books. It's all comic book money, because when you get good at this process and can find good candidates for this, it's a great way to upgrade your collection, add books to your collection, and that's what this channel is mainly focused on, is how to have this hobby fund itself. If that's something that interests you, please consider hitting subscribe. In so doing, it will enter you to win a free slab each and every month. If you subscribe, comment, and like this video, you're entered to win. And if you head over to brycecomics.com and sign up for the newsletter, that's where you get first access to new collections that come through my shop, new mystery boxes, and you also get entered to win a free slab. This month, we're giving away a 3-slab connecting set by Kara Andrews, a really awesome set, and all you have to do is subscribe to the newsletter on my website. Lastly, follow me on Whatnot for some really awesome live comic book sales. We're having some massive sales coming up. There's a link down in the description for $15 towards your first purchase. If you're new to Whatnot, you can come stop by and pick up a free book, because I have books in the Buy It Now for $15. $1 starts on tons of amazing slabs. One of the biggest collections I've ever purchased is coming through the shop next week, if you're watching this when the video comes out, and a lot of those are going to be brought to Whatnot, so I hope to see you over there. So let's just go through some real life actual examples of when to decide and how to decide whether or not you should crack a book out and attempt to go for a higher grade. So first, let's cover what CPR is, crack, press, resubmit. Crack, press, resubmit is when you take a graded comic book and you identify some potential for a grade bump that you think you can improve the comic book and get a higher grade. So you crack it out of the case, have it pressed and cleaned, and resubmit it to be graded again. So that's called CPR, or comic book crack, press, and resubmit. So the first example that I want to show here is Amazing Fantasy 15 in a 1.8 with off-white pages. Now, this book is actually going to be the grand prize of one of the grand prizes of my next mystery box. If you sign up for that newsletter over at my website, you'll get notified when that drops. And this came in, so I'm not going to crack and press this because I bought it for the sole intention of having it as a grand prize for a mystery box. But whoever does win this book for $250, I would highly consider cracking it out and having it resubmitted. So we're going to go through the 3 questions to ask yourself when deciding to crack, press, and resubmit a book. Number 1, what is your intent? Number 2, what is the cost? And number 3, what is the risk? Okay, so the intent, let's cover that first. The intent can be either to improve the appearance of the book or to increase the value of the book. Sometimes it's both. In fact, they usually go hand in hand. But for this specific example, a 1.8 Amazing Fantasy 15, this is usually the type of book that stays in somebody's collection forever. And if you look on the back of the book, I'll put a picture on the screen, you can see that there's a pretty severe spine roll. That's where the back cover is kind of rolled over to the front, and it causes this, spreading of the pages, and it just looks a little bit off. So this book, since it's likely going to stay in that person's collection forever, or if it was my personal copy, I would want it to present the best that it possibly could. And I would consider investing some money in having it pressed, cleaned, and resubmitted and regraded just so that it looks better, okay? So sometimes, whether or not it gets the grade bump or not, just if it looks better, if it's your personal book, that could be worth it. The other intent, of course, is always increasing the value. I mean, you should always be considering the value of comic books. And in order to see whether or not increasing the value of this book, we have to consider what are the odds that it could get a grade bump. And I think that this book can get a bump from a 1.8 to a 2.0. So I'm going to take a video here on my phone while we're recording and just show some of the defects that can be improved. This book has not been pressed or cleaned. So as you can see right there by where it says the word Spider-Man, there's like some really heavy like just rippling finger bends, creases and stuff. These color breaking creases right here, obviously there's nothing you can do about a defect that breaks color. If it breaks color, that's it. If it's missing these little marble chipping along the edge is missing, there's nothing that can be done with that. But these non-color breaking bends and stuff, you can flatten it out and really improve the presentation of this book. But the main thing that I think is detracting from this book is the spine roll. So as you can see, there's that little section of white. That's actually the back cover that is rolled over to the front. And it's really prevalent when you look here on the back. You can see that that should not look like that. It should all be nice and squared up and all one thing. Now, there's also a lot of staining, a lot of color breaking stuff going on with this book. So I believe that this book can get a bump from a 1.8 to a 2.0. I don't think it's going to get to the 2.5 range because of the heavy creasing. Now, how do I know all of that? Well, the reason I know all that, number one, is from experience. And just looking at a lot of 1.8s and 2.0s over the years, you can start to notice the difference between a 1.8 and a 2.0. And the main difference is a 1.8 looks just like a 2.0, except it has really severe versions of the defects of a 2.0. And if you get this book right here, I'm not affiliated with this book in any way. It's just a treasure trove of information. It's available on CGC's website. It's the official CGC guide to grading comics. This book we have waited decades to get. It's full of all of the behind the scenes, how and why CGC grades comics the way it does. And we've waited for it for decades and nobody seems to be talking about it. I highly recommend you pick it up if you're serious about comic book collecting. But in the back of the book here, they actually have examples of Hulk 181 in every single grade. So I'm going to record on my phone here again. So here's the 2.0 version of a Hulk 181. And it says this grade exhibits the same range of defects found in a 2.5, but those defects are slightly more severe or numerous with the exception of stains. No aesthetic defect is singularly capable of pushing a comic down to a 2.0, although in conjunction with structural defects, they can continue to lower the grade. So let's look real quick. There's more information here about a 2.0, but let's go over here to the 1.8. And the first thing that you'll notice between the 1.8, we'll look at this 1.8, heavy creasing on the sides, spine roll, the exact same size spine roll, stapled tears. I mean, this thing is hammered, right? It's been well loved and well read. It was never intended to be a highly valuable collectible for whoever owned this book. And then we look at the 2.0, it looks very, very similar. It's got the same creasing and stuff. This is, it's got a huge reader's crease right here. But it doesn't, it even has a big old spine split right there or corner split. It doesn't have the spine roll. And it turns out that the main difference between a 1.8 and a 2.0, and if you look at the last little bit here, it says, like the 2.5 and 2.0 grades, a 1.8 will otherwise suffer from an accumulation of defects that require an arm's length assessment and mental comparison to other 1.8s. So when you get to the 2.0 or 1.8 range, you can't grade the book with a quantity of defects. You can't start at a 9.8 of what a 9.8 would look like and say, okay, well, it has, 107 color breaking creases. That brings it down to this grade, and it has a spine roll and it has a stain. And if you deduct a value for each one, you end up at a 1.8. You can't use that form of grading to grade low grade books. You have to grade, the overall structural defects, the main structural defects, the limiting defects that get it down to a certain grade. And then you would take a look at this book and you would see this is in the very low grade range. It's somewhere around a 2.0, 2.5. And then what you do is you take an arm's length assessment of the book and you say, okay, yeah, this book is about a 2.0 because of all the defects, but it's also got that spine roll, it's got that staining, it's got all this rippling and stuff on the cover. I think that's going to take it down from a 2.0 to a 1.8. And so that's why I think that this book in particular can be bumped to a 2.0. So let's look at the cost. How much would it cost to have this book pressed and cleaned and regraded. Well, pressing and cleaning depends on who you use. I would recommend finding somebody in the community that's good at this type of thing. There's lots of people out there. I haven't had a good experience yet, so I can't recommend anyone. But if you didn't want to go with the community, you wanted to go with CGC. CGC's pressing service charges 4% of the fair market value for the book for the pressing and cleaning, and 4% of the fair market value or the declared value of the book for the regrading, because you have to have it regraded. So it's going to be a total of 8% of whatever you declare the value to be. Now this is an important part. You can declare the value of an AF-15 1.8 as $7,500, and they probably wouldn't say anything, because the declared value is what you consider based off either what you paid, a reasonable assessment of what it's worth, but it's what it's worth to you. CGC is not in the business of valuing comic books. So unless it's way, way off, like if you put $1,000 thing declared value on this, they'd probably bump that up a little bit. But you could probably get away with $7,500. The actual value of this book is around $20,000. So if you want this book to be completely covered and insured while it's in CGC's possession, you need to declare the value at $20,000. So 8% of $20,000 would be $1,600 to have this book, plus shipping both ways, so maybe $1,700. And if we go to GPA and look at recent sales, a recent sale of a 1.8 was around $19,000, and a recent sale of a 2.0 was around $21,600. So it would be about a wash value-wise if you were to have this resubmitted, crack pressed and resubmitted, and you did get the bump to a 2.0, it would be about a wash value-wise. But if it's your personal collection, it's your personal book, and you get a much better presenting book, it takes it out of the one range and puts it in a 2.0 range. That's a much better feather in your comic book collecting hat. I think it would be worth it, even if there was no value increase, even if it costs you $1,600, but you get a better presenting copy. To me, that would be worth it. So the last thing we need to consider is the risk. What is the risk of pressing a book like this? Well, the risk is always more damage to the book. Anytime you crack a book out of the case, you risk damaging the book. And especially in these low grade Silver Age grails, there's a higher risk of damage. Now, this one in particular, for example, if you press it and it had like brittle pages and these creases were all very brittle, pressing it could cause them to completely separate, and then you would have, pieces missing from the book, and that would greatly impact the grade. Another big one that you have to look out for is spine splits. This one does not have a spine split, but if you were to press it, you need to look at it. If it had like a partial spine split, it would be a big risk to have like a full spine split. So this particular book, I don't think is a big risk to further damage. I think you can, safely press this book because the defects, I don't think are gonna get much worse. I think the benefit outweighs the cons here as far as risk goes. Now, a spine roll is a relatively invasive process, all right? It's not like a standard regular press. There is more to it and there's more risk in that. But again, because of the structural integrity of this book, I think it's okay. A lot of 1.8s are 1.8s because they have spine splits. And if that's the case, you probably shouldn't be pressing the book. All right, let's take a look at the next example. The next example here is Incredible Hulk #1 in a 3.0 with white pages. Now, this book is also going to be a grand prize for my next mystery box. And this book is a slam dunk, no-brainer. Do not crack press and resubmit this book. So how did I come to that conclusion? Well, just by my initial impression of looking at the book, I don't know that I would say a 3.0 is a gift grade per se, but it's definitely on the generous side. I can easily see this book getting a 2.5 because of the staining and because of the spine splits. So I'll get a better video of it here so you guys can see. Up in the corner here, it has about however big that is, a 1 or 2 inch spine split. It's got, heavy wear and creasing down the spine as would be expected with something in the 2.5, 3.0 range. Another split down there at the bottom. And it's also got staining throughout the entire book. So you can see there's a large stain right there on the front in the L and the K. There's also, it's evident that this book has not been pressed or cleaned. You can see that there's a lot of creasing and rippling and stuff that can be flattened out. And so that is one interesting part of this book. But there you can see, the severe large stain on the back as well. Looking at this book, you can tell it has been pressed and cleaned. And that is a very common mistake, and a mistake that I made and learned the hard way when I first started doing this process was, if you take a book that's been graded and you can identify defects that can absolutely be improved, surely if you improve those defects, you'd get a higher grade, right? I mean, a logical person would think that, but that is not the case. In fact, you can even improve grades, like in this book for the Hulk 1, and you can... in fact, you can even improve defects, like for this Hulk number 1, and result in a lower grade. That has happened to me before. I did a whole video on it. I improved 16 defects of a book and got the same grade, but I've also had it where you improve defects and get a lower grade. And the reason for that is that grading standards have changed over time. And this book is in an older label case. It's not the first gen CGC case, but it is old. So it's been, probably at least a decade or so since this book has been graded. And not only have grading standards changed over time, and there's nuance to that, and people are on different sides of the fence about how they've changed. One thing's for sure, they definitely have changed. But not only have they changed over time, they change based on the grader and any given day, because the grading process is subjective. Now, a lot of people hem and haw and say that CGC is a scam and that they would never grade books because of this. And my response to that is, do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. We absolutely need grading companies. And yes, it's a subjective process because there's no other way. It has to be subjective. It has to be a person that, assigns it a value based on their opinion. This can't be like a mechanical process, especially for these low grade books when you're looking at accumulation of defects, the difference between a 2.0 and a 1.8. That's not something that can be anything other than a person's opinion. And grading has completely revolutionized the comic book collecting hobby. In order to remove grading, the people that would say, like, let's just go back to collecting raw books, that would mean that everybody buying and selling books would, number one, need to be honest, and we're not going to get that from all dealers across the board. There are lots of dealers that will overgrade things and not be honest about the grade of the book. So it took that out of the equation, which was enough in itself to justify grading. And the second thing is that everybody buying and selling books would have to be a professional grader. You would have to be able to look at a raw book and be able to tell yourself the difference between a 2.0 and a 1.8. And it's not even remotely reasonable to think that everybody buying and selling books should be a professional grader. We just need grading companies to be good enough and accurate enough to have enough confidence to buy and sell, these highly valuable collectibles. And that's what we do have with CGC. So don't get caught up in the BS of hemming and hawing about the subjectiveness of grading. It is what it is, and we need it, in my opinion. So this book, the reason it's a slam dunk no for me is that even if you improve the defects, I think it would likely get a 2.5 when it came back. The second thing is, if you were to look at, So for this book, if we look at our three criteria, number one, what is the intent? The intent would be to have this book present better and be more valuable. Well, it's not going to present better if it says 2.5 right here, okay? That is part of the presentation. When you own a book, the grade on the book is part of the presentation. And so I don't think you can improve the presentation. You might be able to get some of the rippling and stuff out, but at the end of the day, you're not going to really notice that anywhere near as much as the number up here in the corner. The other thing is to look at the risk. So the risk to the value, any drop in grade for a Silver Age Grail is devastating. You would never want to spend money to lose value. But the other risk is the integrity of the book. And because this book has splitting at the top and bottom of the spine, it's highly likely that pressing this book would cause that split to get even worse. And that would, counteract any improvements that you made. It would be really bad to have this completely split or to split anymore. The last thing is that this book has white pages, and this is something that took me by surprise when I started submitting books, is that page quality designation is also subjective. I thought when you submitted a book, surely they have like a little card that says this is white, this is off-white, this is cream, but that is not how it works. Page quality designation is also a subjective process, and if you understand why, you would see that that's reasonable and why it is the way it is. White doesn't necessarily mean white, okay? You can have brown pages that get the white page designation. So what white means is that the book page quality looks the same as it did the day it rolled off the press. That's why it's so amazing that this Hulk #1 has white pages. I mean, this book is from 1962 and the page quality looks the same as the day it rolled off the press. That also speaks to the integrity of the book overall. And when you're looking at Silver Age Grails, if you can get white pages, that is such a bonus because it means it's going to hold up better over time. But if the page color when the book was printed was a brown tint, it can still have brown tinted pages and be white pages. So they really should use something other than colors to designate page quality, but it is what it is. We've got this far in the hobby, they can't change it now. But I can easily see this book coming back a 2.5 off white to white, and that would be absolutely devastating. So this one is a slam dunk. Do not crack press and resubmit that one. Now, you can have this book reholdered for a new case. A lot of people don't like the old CGC cases. The plastic over time is not as clear. It can affect the presentation of the book, and so you can submit this book to be reholdered. And when you reholder a book with CGC, they do not regrade the book unless it appears that the book has incurred damage from the day that it was graded. Because a really important thing to understand here is that CGC does not guarantee the grade on the label. I'm going to repeat that. CGC does not guarantee the grade on the label. As soon as the book leaves their hands, they just can't guarantee that that's the grade that's going to be, because the person that receives the book can do any number of things to cause damage to the book, negating the grade. So if you bought this book and you put it in a windowsill and over time the sun just completely faded the colors, it's no longer a 3.0. If you bought this book and you shipped it to someone and it was severely damaged in shipping, obviously it's no longer a 3.0. So you do have to consider that when you send in a book for reholder, and it's pretty easy to determine. You take a look at the book and you say, has any damage happened to this that wasn't there when it was graded? And usually it'll be sun fading, or if there's if the book has shifted inside the case severe enough to cause damage. With a low grade book like a 3.0, even if it did shift a little in the book and cause a new crease, there's so many creases on this thing that shifting inside the case and causing new crease is not going to lower it anymore from a 3.0. If this was a 9.8 and it shifted in the case and caused a big bend in one of the corners, absolutely that book is no longer a 9.8, and you just need to be aware of that when you resubmit it. They might regrade it and send it back to you a 9.2. So it's pretty easy to determine. If it's a 9.8, take a look and see if there's, it should be near mint, it should be nearly perfect, and if there's anything that's clearly not nearly perfect, then maybe that damage happened after it was graded. And if it's a low grade book, sun fading is the main thing you want to look for that. All right, so next I want to talk about an example of a crossover grade where it makes a lot of sense to cross over the book. Crossover is when you take a book that's graded by another company like PGX or CBCS and have it graded by CGC. And in both cases, anytime you can get the same book from either PGX or CBCS, cross over to CGC and get the same grade, there's going to be a value increase. CGC books just across the board are worth more than the CBCS or PGX counterparts. Now, I've done a lot of videos on PGX. The main thing you need to look out for here is undetected restoration. PGX is notorious for grading a lot of books that are actually restored, and then if you were to have them cross over to CGC, they're graded as unrestored from PGX, and cross over to CGC, you might get a purple label, which is a drastic change in value. I have lots of videos on the channel about that. You can go check out for more information on that. But recently I got a book that was a CBCS 9.0 Batman #180. Number 183 in an old CBCS case. This book looks really, really nice. It's a 9.0. It's the second appearance of Poison Ivy, 12-cent Batman from 1966. And I definitely might have to crack this sucker out. Yeah, I'm definitely going to crack this out. It looks super, super clean. Anytime you can get a CBCS crossed over to CGC and get a grade bump, that's a double win, because you get the increase in value from changing grading companies, and you also get the increase in value in increasing the grade. When I cracked this book out, it was so nice. It didn't have any pressable defects. Like, the defects that were on it were either color breaking or, you know, cover tanning, some minor spine stress, and nothing that, if I pressed it, there was nothing that could be improved. Sometimes there's defects. The book just is what it is. Like, you can press it and it's not going to actually look better. So I didn't even press this book. I just resubmitted it to CGC and I just got the results. If I get the actual book back, I'll put a picture of the actual book, but it came back a 9.2. So it went from a 9.0 CBCS to a 9.2 CGC. So I'll put up on the screen, I haven't even looked at the values. I hope that the value difference is enough for this. But one thing's for certain, whether or not there's an increase in value, hopefully there is, it's a lot easier to sell a CGC graded book. There's a lot of people that only collect CGC books. And as a retailer, you know, CGC books just sell easier, faster, and for more money. So the fact that even if there's not a value increase, the ease of selling it is going to be a great bonus. For this example, let's take a look at our 3 criteria. Number 1, what is the intent? Well, the intent was to increase value and to make it easier to sell this book. This isn't going to be a personal collection book for me. I did intend to sell it, and crossing it over to CGC, even if it just kept the same grade, would mean that it'd be easier to sell. The second, let's look at the cost. Well, the cost of doing this was, I think it's about $40 all in. So something like that for a vintage book. A minimal cost, and the risk, there was very, very little risk involved with this. You know, I didn't even press it, so there wasn't a risk of causing more damage. There's always the risk of damage being incurred in shipping or handling by CGC, but luckily that didn't happen in this case. And so the risk was relatively low, the cost was relatively low, and the intent had a good chance at achieving, so that was a no-brainer to go ahead and do this. This is kind of a rare situation where you get a CBCS book that was harshly graded that you can just crack out and get a higher grade in CGC, but I have seen it several times. And my tip here would be, don't rule out CBCS when you can have an opportunity like this. I mean, if this was a book that you're actually after, if you're hunting a book and you see that book in a CBCS case that's 20-25% less than the CGC counterpart, and it has a chance at a grade bump, by all means, you should be considering buying that book so you can crack it out. That's a great way to get the books in your collection at a discount. So what are my 2 main tips and takeaways from this whole process? Number 1, and I've talked about this tip all the time, it's really important. Don't be blinded by desire. You could want that grade bump so bad for that Incredible Hulk number 1. You see those defects and you think, man, if I get this book up to a 3.5 or a 4.0, and you put those blinders on because you want it so bad that you don't see the fact that a 3.0 is kind of a generous grade as is, and you kind of ignore the spine splitting, or the bigger thing is that you don't look into it too much. You just say, okay, it has defects that can be improved, therefore it can get a higher grade. But really what you need to do is look into that and say, can it? What are the qualifications for a 3.5 or 4.0? Does this book have any chance of that? So don't be blinded by desire. If something's staring you right in the face like a spine split, make sure that you recognize that and say, this isn't a good candidate. The second tip would be, really play the tape through. Play the tape through with all the different possibilities and scenarios. Put the numbers on a spreadsheet. Look up sales values. That's another really big one. Don't just assume that if you can go from a 2.5 to a 3.0, it's going to be worth it. If it's going to cost you $1,600 and there's actually no price difference between those two, if your intent is to make money, that doesn't make sense. So really play the tape through, crunch the numbers, look up the sales and all the potential possibilities, and then make your final decision of whether or not it makes sense to take the risk, because it's always a risk, to crack press and resubmit. That's it for this video. Just 3 examples of me talking about the process of crack, press, resubmit, a really lucrative way to add value to your collection. And some people are so good at it, they even fund the entire hobby with this process. Even if you're nowhere near buying books of this caliber or this level, you can apply the principles in this video to pretty much any book. Don't forget, we always have a giveaway here on the YouTube channel. If you subscribe, comment, and like, you're entered to win a free slab. And if you head over to brycecomics.com and sign up for the newsletter, you're entered to win 3 CGC 9.8s this month that make a connecting cover by Care Andrews. That's also where you get first access to new collections that come through the shop. My biggest collection ever coming through next week. And it's also where you get first access to new mystery boxes, where the next mystery box is going to have these 2 books as grand prizes that we featured in this video. Also, follow me over on Whatnot. We have some amazing Whatnot shows, tons of giveaways, chances at mini grails, all kinds of fun stuff over on Whatnot. Link down in the description for $15 towards your first purchase. Come by, pick up a free book, because I'll have stuff in the buy it now for $15. Thank you as always for sticking with me to the end of the video. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye.